everybody. This is Heather Lockett with Lasting Conversations. And you know how we love to offer support and guidance and open up the conversation into different areas. And we are doing just that today with the lovely Jennifer Parker. Hey, Jennifer.
Hi there. Glad to be here.
Great. And we're zooming in. You're in Wisconsin, USA. And I'm so happy that we finally got to sit together to chat. And Jennifer's work is very vital for so many of us around the world, actually. And that gets into being survivors or recognizing and understanding coercive relationships and what that might actually mean and entail. And more importantly, how to navigate your way through that and away from that. And maybe even, I'll throw this out as an aside, Jennifer, for those who perhaps have that in them that they don't understand that maybe they have those aspects of being kind of coercive themselves or downright abusive. So we're going to talk about these things and talk about the empowerment at navigating your way through to the other side of that. So welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. And I noticed that you have a variety of conversations, so it's really a great service for people. And thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for recognizing that. So this jumps into this kind of a wheelhouse that can feel, I think we've all had our moments of recognizing we've been in different flavors of coercive and or even abusive type relationships. And some of them can be outwardly, which involve physical violence. And then some of it is more insidious and tricky, which is an undercurrent. You don't know that you're in relationships that perhaps are not very healthy. Is this correct?
Or it sneaks up on you.
And it sneaks up on you.
Right. Yeah. It can be very seductive at first, particularly many times what happens is the relationship seems really wonderful because they're showing great interest and so forth. And you might not pick up on some of the signs of it being a coercive relationship or becoming a coercive relationship until you're really invested. And then it's really hard. I mean, it's hard to leave a relationship, right? That you love.
Always, yes, right.
Yes, it's always difficult, but it can become more difficult if you've been affected by coercive behavior.
So you are an MSSW, you're in the therapy field, you actually help train and guide therapists to offer these supports. So tell us some of these signs or tell us some of the interesting things that we might need to know about, and then we'll get into the rest of it.
Well, first I want to talk about some early signs that might not seem problematic and sometimes aren't problematic, but things to kind of look out for. So for instance, if someone really wants to get in the relationship very quickly and seems very dependent wants all their time with you. Now, of course, when we first meet somebody and fall in love, that's a normal thing. It's like we do want to spend a lot of time with one another. So it's like, how do you navigate that? What I say is watch out, just kind of be an observer. It's like, is it okay for you to do things with other people, or are they pouting or claiming that you're selfish, for instance? So that's one thing. Do they have a lot of interest in other relationships that they also depend on? That can be a sign. Again, not necessarily that they're going to be abusive, but that is something that happens. It's like that they tend to be totally dependent upon you for emotional support. And therefore, maybe have some insecurities that cause them to not want you to have other relationships. If you have a conflict is normal, right? When you have a conflict, how is that handled? Is it handled in more of an aggressive way? Is it handled in a way that feels constructive to you, or do they get into verbal abuse or something like that? Those can be early signs. Another thing is, are they constantly talking about other people in the past that they've had problems with? And of course, if you've been in an abusive relationship yourself, you might want to talk about your past experience. But it's a way in which somebody is always to blame for whatever problems they have in life. And so kind of, again, being curious about that, being observant, maybe finding out more information. as you're getting to know the person. So those are a few things to really look out for. And then, of course, I don't know if you want me to get into what does coercive control look like, but there's a variety of things.
There is a variety of things. Absolutely. I was just sort of relating it to, again, we've all had these different iterations ourselves in some ways. And hopefully not. Maybe I know people who never have. So this is super cool. Those are the good models. Yeah. But I do have a friend of mine, for instance, that had, after she had had a divorce and that met somebody, and one of the giant red flags had been someone who did that very first thing, which is, oh, I love you so much. Let's get married. And why don't you want to get married? And it was just this blanket of too much, way too soon. And of course, things went south very quickly. And those are, so I understand what you're talking about. And then as well as when it kind of can creep up on you sometimes, that maybe you've been brought up as a child in relationships that you don't quite understand. Maybe there's a different way, and there's certainly a different way of communicating what you need versus what somebody else, even your parents, might need.
Right.
Is it?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Childhood, not people who get into abusive or coercive relationships don't always come from families that have had abuse in them.
True. Yep.
I don't want to say that, because it can be very interesting. Sometimes people have come from very healthy families and they've been ill-equipped to recognize it because of that, recognize what's going on. They assume, oh, this person's going to be mutual and mutually respectful and so forth, and be able to talk. And then they find out that, no, that's not the case. But if you have grown up in a family where either there was abuse going on, or you weren't able to grow a really healthy self-confidence, then that becomes a vulnerability, certainly. And sometimes people, if they've gotten out of an abusive relationship, they're so hungry for something that's healthy. Initially, they might be fooled by that. One term for it is love bombing. It's like, oh, how wonderful you are, and the wonderful things they're doing for you, and really being helpful. And I'm not saying that's always bad, but it's like, if it's going overboard, kind of having that sense of balance there is really important. And trusting your gut. Trusting your gut. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you were about to say, you're about to actually share with us about some signs, or there was another path that you're going to take us on?
Well, coercive control is, some people may not be familiar with that term. It's a newer term. Evan Stark came up with it, which, by the way, I do recommend his book also. But coercive control is a pattern of behavior, consistent pattern of behavior that is used to dominate you in some way. And they do that by causing you to doubt yourself. It can be kind of crazy making sort of behavior, saying, no, this didn't happen, those kinds of things. It's behavior that creates some dependency over time, and that essentially violates your civil rights. And that's a term that often hasn't been used with survivors of abuse, but abuse violates your civil rights. It calls into question even if you had those rights oftentimes. So it's a consistent pattern of behavior. It's not a one-time thing. It's over time, and it can keep building and actually becoming more coercive over time. Now, in my book, I talk about 12 different bricks. I call them bricks in the book, but 12 different types of coercive behavior, starting with seduction and then moving on. And I labeled them by how they affect the person. And they're all related, but there's different kinds, and 10 of them are emotional, verbal, those kinds of things. Only 2 of them are physical. And I really want to outline how damaging it is to be emotionally abused. Too often in our culture, we've kind of poo-pooed that. It's like, oh, that's not, people are just looking for the physical. And in many of these relationships, there isn't the physical. unless they're really threatened that maybe you're going to leave, and then sometimes it escalates to that. But the emotional abuse, and there's research to back this up, affects you as much or more than
Right.
The physical abuse. And actually, emotional abuse is used. If they can do that, then they don't have to use the physical, oftentimes.
So all of this is just so true and valid. And I think a lot of people are understanding, and there's certain research and it's out in the ethers about narcissism and narcissistic abuse and the
Yes.
moth to the flame aspect. You're talking about if somebody's vulnerable and or hungry, then they're attracted to some of these behaviors. Is there a difference, or is it a kissing cousin, the narcissistic flavors versus what you're talking about, the coercion piece that you were coercive control? Is there a little bit difference,
question.
or does it come from the same place, really?
It really comes from the same place in terms of what they believe and what they feel entitled to do. Not everyone who is in a coercive relationship has a partner who would be diagnosed as a narcissist.
Right.
There's a difference there. However, any of us can have some narcissistic traits from time to time. And
Right.
so it's very common for people in intimate who do intimate partner abuse to have some of those narcissistic traits. And I think my own thinking, and I don't know of research right now that bears this out, it's like the more narcissism there might be, the more difficult it might be, or the more sociopathic, for instance, it might be, and more difficult. But if you think about it, our old socialization for men actually tended to kind of give them a sense of entitlement, right? I'm talking about traditional socialization for men and women, that men were somehow more entitled to be in control. And that didn't necessarily mean they were abusive, but someone who believes that it's okay to use abuse, that kind of gives them that in there. So to answer your question, it's really all about feeling entitled to use power and control over your partner to get your way no matter what. And then no matter what, it depends upon the person in terms of how far they'll go. Some will go to physical abuse, some will go to murder. There's a continuum in terms of where those behaviors are. But the damage to people emotionally, when, even with emotional abuse, I've had people say that they feel like they lost themselves. They're so confused. They don't understand what's going on. So,
well, and so tell us some of this, because, and I do have a copy of your book that you nicely sent, which is Coercive Relationships, Finding the Answers You Seek. I don't know if you can even see that. The important thing is the finding the answers you seek, because sometimes if we're in the lowest of our low, or we don't know what's really happening, because if you're in that soup, the proverbial, the frog that doesn't know it's getting cooked, that whole metaphor.
Right.
You want to tell us some of the signs of feeling, from being in it. If you're feeling, how do I heal? Why am I being abused? But even before that, if you don't even recognize that this is abusive behavior, talk to us about that. If you don't even know that you're in a situation.
If you haven't named it, in other words, if you don't know,
if you haven't named it, if there are some signs perhaps that one could say, oh, maybe I need some help, or maybe I need to understand that this is no longer healthy for me. Are there signs for people?
Well, let's start with, when you get into a love relationship, you don't expect to get abused, right?
Correct.
At least most of us don't.
Nobody does.
Okay. And we tend to have expectations of the person is going to be mutually interested in us, mutually respectful, that kind of thing. Right. And when you start to get signs that that's not happening, that can be very confusing. It's like, and they help you with this too. And you tend to look, this is a healthy thing to look, it's like, well, is there something I'm doing? And then often usually the partner will say, it's all about you, that's what's going on. And so that can become kind of the sinkhole of what happens in terms of getting caught up in it, instead of trusting your gut, as I mentioned before. So confusion is something. It's like, if you're confused about, wait a minute, they said they were going to do this, but then now they're saying they didn't say that. or they say that I'm selfish when I want to go out with my friends, or I even want to see my family. Those can be very confusing things. I must not love them enough because I do want to do these things, or they start
Hmm.
talking bad about my family, claiming that they don't like them, or that the family doesn't like them, and that just doesn't make sense to you. Those are things very important to pay attention to. And as people are healing and recovery, a really important piece of that is, first of all, being able to name and tell your own story instead of it being shaped by what the other person says about you or what you begin to think about you. It's like, well, maybe I'm crazy. I've heard
Hmm.
people say that. I don't know. Is it me? Am I making too much of these things? Those are all signs that, gee, there's something going on here. And let's find out what. I encourage people to find out, to really look at that and find people who can help them.
That's beautiful. So give us you love to doing the empowering of survivors or people when they're in that spot and they might
Hmm.
recognize that they do that soul searching or have a good
Hmm.
friend to say, are you sure that this is really healthy? Are you sure you're okay? Really look at that and make sure, are you okay? Because if
Hmm.
even for a nanosecond you're thinking you're not, talk to somebody else, right? Talk to a safe,
Absolutely.
I think you must use the word safety. We all have a thing about feeling a safe sounding board, right?
Yes. A trusted person who's not
Right,
just going to say, oh, you got to do this, but
right,
who's going to listen to you and encourage and support you.
right.
Um,
Right,
that's
because you
one of
don't
the
want to be
first
you don't
things.
want to be oh I'm sorry, I was just going to say you don't want to be overboarded, and I think Brene Brown talks about that. We don't want to we also want to be that safe place to just listen and
Right.
perhaps guide if they're ready for that versus, well,
Right.
you got to do this and he's an asshole or blah 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 blah. Like we friends can
Right.
also tend to be overzealously protective maybe, but that's what we mean about safety. Can we as someone who might be a friend or a partner who's in a bit of a trouble, be that safe space for somebody that they feel that I think I have to tell you something and I don't even know what it is yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good thing to bring up because there certainly will be listeners who aren't necessarily experiencing it, but may know
Right.
someone. And it
Right.
is important to be that safe space. Initially, telling the person what to do or calling them names could
Yep.
actually cause them to distance
Yep.
themselves from you because they
Right.
might not be ready for that, first of
Right.
all. And it just isn't helpful, to use name calling, generally speaking. Um, so one of the very important things, so paying attention if you're confused, and then finding those safe people to talk to. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's family. One of the most difficult things about recovery is that you oftentimes become very isolated for two reasons.
Hmm.
One of them is perhaps your partner doesn't want you to have contact with other people. They want to dominate your perspective, what you think about things. And if the more contact you have with others, they might feel like they lose some of that control. They might hear from a friend. You might hear from a friend that, gee, that felt really creepy to me.
Hmm.
Can you talk to me about it? The second thing is, if you begin to doubt yourself, and to feel understandably embarrassed and maybe ashamed about what's going on in your relationship, quite often that leads you to pull back from other people because you don't want them to know.
Hmm.
Okay. And that again, that's driven by what your partner might be saying to you about those other people, or, whether you're selfish to want to be with them. And so that being isolated in that way really makes it worse for you because you don't have access to a listening ear who's going to be able to support you and encourage you, and to name what they think is happening and to talk to you about what do you think, and you need that. And so if you become really isolated, and for some people it's like dangerous to reach out, if you
Hmm.
have, one way to begin to do that is with a medical professional. because generally speaking, hopefully you get to do regular medical appointments. So, and hopefully your medical provider has been trained to recognize and to be able to talk about this, not to help you as a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
but to tell you what the resources are in the community. So that's one possibility. And sometimes the first person you can really talk to about is a therapist or a coach or something. And so finding that therapist who understands coercive control, who understands how to best help you and support you, not just tell you, oh, you've got to leave, because not that it's not okay for you to leave, but that can be, it's like that isn't the first step for people. It's like they need more support and more encouragement, and kind of looking at some of the roadblocks there might be to leaving for them if they become very isolated.
Right. That is so key. The isolation part, that kind of is,
Yeah.
that's that dark tunnel that can feel almost insurmountable sometimes. So let's sort of switch that and be that light in the tunnel. And so you're talking about the empowering, let's talk about the other side of this and what that looks like. And of course, you give your other fellow therapists the tools to help empower their clients.
Right, right. So one of the things to begin to empower yourself, or for others to empower themselves, is that listening to a podcast like this, reading a book maybe that was suggested, going online and finding resources. And I just want to say that sometimes that's dangerous because they might be monitoring the computer. So people have to know what is possible for them to do. And then finding, when you're in a coercive relationship, an abusive relationship, it's normal to be hyper vigilant for danger. And I'm not just talking physical, I'm talking emotional. It's like, are they going to be upset when they come home? What's going to trigger? What about really being very tight, feeling like you got to be in very tight control of yourself to try to avoid, and never being able to totally avoid. That's one of the myths that survivors can swallow. And so they keep trying to get it right, when that's not the issue, that they're not being perfect. The issue is the other person has a need to have power and control over them, and to get what they want, and to somehow they can be very jealous, or jealous isn't the word I want. They can be very insecure. And so really things that might really serve you, like let's say you have a job and you get a promotion, their response to that might not be what you would think, because they might think, oh, she's, going to think she's really something else. So they might try to put that down or interfere with having a job even sometimes. So I got off track a little bit there.
No. It actually is perfect, because within all of that, in terms of the empowerment piece, is so vital, because then if our entire energy can shift from almost attracting, because we're so used to it, that whole moth to the flame thing, attracting people that will not have your back, right, into your tribe, becomes your cheerleaders, the people who will always have your back. And of course, it wouldn't necessarily be every little person, but still, if you get to that space of so much of your self-solidarity that none of these things are even possible in your realm anymore, that even perhaps within a job, if you're in a job in a company and their whole mindset, as many of our last people on the show were talking about, what good leadership is no longer tearing people down and thrashing and being literally verbally abusive, let alone with paychecks and everything else. If people are seen and heard and validated, and you don't have to have a bad, quote unquote, abusive marriage. You could be in an abusive job, leave that when you're not being valued. But that comes into that self-worth and self-value. That's where this empowerment piece, it really ties in together, which is also so important.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it isn't just in intimate relationships. It also happens at work. It happens in churches. It happens in our political system. It happens, throughout our culture. And that is because there are some beliefs that lead to domination and oppression throughout our culture, whether that's racism, whether it's sexism, whether it's intimate partner abuse, whether it's sexual assault, all of those things.
Yep.
So yeah, the
Well,
belief
and
in
go
being
ahead.
entitled, and that some people
Yep.
are more entitled than others. Really.
And you were saying entitled, somehow the word that keeps coming to mind is the assumption. The assumption that, the husband wife thing, one is over the next. The assumption that I can just take you physically. The assumption that I'm the boss at a job and you are my minions. These assumptions, aka entitlements, can just get so very haywire. And I think generationally too, like, we've had certain generations who have grown up assuming, or maybe their church rules or whatever it is, the assumption have these disparities. But the younger kids, many of them understand we are all in this thing together, and let's mutually have some respect here. And so that they will flame out as soon as they catch whiff that there is no, authenticity, transparency. I think they can see through bullshit, and they certainly don't want to be anywhere near people that are going to tell them what to do. Now I know that can rabbit hole into some other things that's that hypervigilance, and I will table the rest of that. Everything's triggering. No, everything doesn't have to be triggering, but that still comes back to that self-sovereignty. If you understand your own net worth and value, every little thing won't be this big trigger.
Yes. Or if you see a trigger, you'll be able to walk away from it.
You can walk away.
A red flag, I should say. Yeah.
Yep.
And the things that I talked about early in the show, that things to pay attention to, I call those yellow flags. I forgot to mention that. So it's like, okay, ask more questions, check things out. Do they really, is it okay for me to see other people? What is their thoughts about that? And you'll get more information. But the red flags are certainly things like, it's not okay for you to be a unique individual and do things your own way. Somehow there's a perfect out there and you never measure up. For instance.
Well, there you go. I love that you brought that up in terms of the different flags. So obviously we've touched on the red flag and then the drowning flag, where we've done that. No swimming, red flag. And then the yellow flag, maybe those are the areas to look at, observe, maybe have a conversation about, to see if you can walk through those. Let's talk about the green flags. What do you consider green flag? The healthy pieces of relationship, whether it's in friendships, workplaces, etc.
Absolutely. Being able to be mutual, to, that you listen to them, but they also listen to you, and they show interest in your activities, not overtaking, not over the top kind of thing, which you mentioned before, but they show interest, and you're able to have a mutual conversation. Right. You can have disagreements and have that not escalate into something that's really uncomfortable. So being able to constructively navigate disagreements. People who are able to express what they want in a non-controlling way. For instance, just acknowledging, Heather, my preference is that we don't record today. Let me know what you think about that. It's a non-controlling. It's not like you're dominating them, but you're able to express and stand up for yourself.
Right.
And so when other people can do that, that's a good thing, while they also respect your rights, your preferences, so there can be a negotiation. People who don't always have to be with you or have to always be or feel comfortable just being with themselves. That's a good sign to look for. Who just feel good about themselves without feeling entitled or better than. Exactly. And that's a mistake that oftentimes survivors make, and it's because of what's happened to them, is they somehow get uncomfortable with being able to express, success that they had because, oh, somebody's going to think I feel better than. That doesn't mean that you think you're better than other people. And it could also come from dealing with people who have that belief that they are better than, that they assume that, and they're, priding it over you, so to speak. So
that's right. And then let's see if there's some sparkly flags, the things that where it's really uplifting. You're in a relationship, you're having conversations where even if you are treading waters, you're talking about scheduling. Is this going to work for you today? If it doesn't, okay, cool. I'll see you another. You're not attached necessarily because you understand it's going to work out when it's going to work out, whether it's physically seeing somebody or whatever it is. So let's see if there are other, for instances, of what might be a sparkly flag that somebody really is saying, I don't know, it just feels good. And you have that mutually wonderful hum together.
It feels like there's a balance to the relationship.
There's a balance, right?
I mean, maybe sometime if they have a problem, you're spending more time talking about their issue, but it also happens that you get to talk about yours at another time.
Right.
Being thinking about whatever issue, if you're having an issue or you're having a birthday or whatever, that they actually think about you and check in with you, those kinds of things. Those are sparkly. Is that what you mean?
I think that's true because those are some of those little nano moments that maybe you wouldn't think about. Oh, wait a second. Well, again, that words gets into assumption and how easy it can be. Oh, I didn't hear from so-and-so. Maybe is that about me? And, I want to cancel them. No, maybe they're going through a time in their life. However, what you're saying is the ones that can show up for you consistently, not just they might be having a season and they happen to not be there, but if they consistently are not there for you, even to say, hey, happy birthday, that goes back to the red flags. So the sparkly flags are the ones that that no matter what their own season is, you can feel it. You can feel it in the ethers. They've got your back. They know that you exist. They know that you're there, that you have each other's backs.
That they're going to pay attention when you need the attention.
That's right.
And if it's not a good time for them, that they'll make time, because, all of us are busy and it isn't necessarily the right moment for us to listen, but it's like, but I'm going to make time for that.
Right.
A person's attention is very valuable and it shows that they value you.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And just feeling good being around a person, just feeling good. You can ask yourself, why do I feel so good around this person?
Right.
And have some answers, but there can be a variety that, that's important to pay attention to. If somebody feels like a drain all the time, that's important to pay attention to.
It is important to pay attention to if you're with somebody and you realize driving home, you're going, I'm exhausted or I have a headache. Listen to that. What was brought up there.
Yes.
For sure.
And sometimes that means that you want to not be around that person. For other people, I mean, maybe as a family member, you're not going to divorce yourself from, but you can manage how much time you spend with them or, have some protection around that.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So there was something when we chatted before when I was away and we first talked. This might get into a little bit of a tangent, but I think it gets back into that empowerment and the reframing. You were talking about people of a certain age and the notion of retiring, but it's rehiring and it's being a new phase in life and profession. And to be honest, I forget that what we were on a really beautiful tangent about that, but it was important enough that I wrote it down as something we wanted to touch on today. Do you want to share about that? Yeah.
I think we were talking about, I was acknowledging that I'm in my 70s. Great. And that I retired when I published my book. And I wrote that book, Coercive Relationships, because I had done a lot of work with intimate partner abuse survivors over the years. I developed a curriculum and materials. And I thought I'd like to share this with more people because I just saw the empowerment that happened, the blossoming that happened with people when they were able to do that work. So that's why I wrote the book. And it took years because I was busy.
Well, and it's very, very thorough. And I have to say, it's very thorough. It's a beautiful book because it really wonderfully, it goes there and it's a huge topic. So I give you all kinds of props. If it took a long time is
Mhm.
the outcome, you can see
Yeah.
it. So anyway, just
First, I
saying.
had to learn how to become a writer,
Yeah.
and then and it
Yeah.
just took. So when I published that book
Yeah.
in my early 70s, it was like, oh, I had to learn, other skills because that therapist doesn't market. A therapist does, I
Yep.
needed to do. It's like this is more work than I want to be doing. Plus, I had that other mission that I really wanted to work with other therapists in terms of passing on my knowledge to them because I had too many people come to me saying, "Oh, I wish I'd found you earlier, that this therapist or that therapist didn't
Yep.
understand, or maybe we're pushing them to get out of the relationship too early or before they were ready," those kinds of things. So that is also really important. So it's like and I value, I take care of myself. I practice what I preach. So it's like, okay, this is too much. I had to retire as a therapist. And so I talk to you about, I call it refiring instead of retiring because I'm busy every day. Well, I'm as busy as I want to be
There
because
you
I can
go.
also take time off and
That's
so
right.
forth. But
Yep.
I'm still working, but I've refired into being this author, being a presenter, those kinds of things. So, and that's so important. And actually, as I'm thinking about it, that's something for people who are in abusive relationships to think about is like there is a life after that. It's difficult, when you're in it to get out of it oftentimes. I mean, always, but it can feel like it's never ending, but to really focus on you can create the kind of life that you want. And so that's another way to refire yourself, so to speak,
I
not as a
love that.
career, but in terms of your relationships. Yeah.
True. Well, and it can be so it's the new fire in your belly. The new we think of being fired as now you aren't there anymore. But no, you're talking about the new fire under your feet, the new things that
Yes.
jazz you, the new
Yes.
decisions that you can make for yourself every day. And so I love that you're
Mhm.
saying, I've been there, done that. I've sat in the chair with somebody for my career, and now it sounds like two beautiful things happen. Now you can have a broader reach going to the therapists themselves who are now doing
Mhm.
their job, and you get
Exactly.
to now reformulate how you want to spend your day and your career and not
Mhm.
necessarily tied to the same old thing. And again, some of
Mhm.
our beautiful guests are talking about that. Don't be caged by
Mm.
our age. And you're
Oh,
saying,
yes.
right? Don't be caged by our age. And you're saying, don't be
No. Mm-mm.
caged. Don't be caged by these relationships or by this life that you have led because there's something completely different for you.
Yes.
There's
And I
something
think
completely different.
something that I like to say to people is you are not what happened to you. And
Right.
sometimes it could feel that way. It's like you are not what happened to you. That's on them. That's their responsibility. What you can do now is to recover, heal, find those a team of people or people that support you through this healing process and figure out, it takes time to figure out what it is you want a lot of times. If you've been feeling pretty, let's say, beaten down, to use that
Mm-hmm.
violent word, feeling like you've lost yourself,
Mm-hmm.
feeling confused and not sure what you want in life, it takes some time. Be patient with yourself and explore.
Yep. Patient and gentle with yourself. I think
Yes,
that's so huge. And
gentle.
that I've had people remind me,
Hmm.
we all have our moments that we just need to curl in bed for a day, a weekend, a week even. And then but to
Hmm.
know you get back up,
Hmm.
but to be very gentle with ourselves and to take that time. Whether you're in grief
Yes.
spaces or just in these times right now, it's very intense all around on so many levels, to
Hmm.
have fun and to be gentle with ourselves and to really take that pause to understand, what do I need in this moment. So if it's to leave a relationship or even a town, or go
Hmm.
on in a whole different adventure, a whole other chapter,
Hmm.
then do that, whatever is soul nourishing, right?
Well, I'm glad that you brought up that word grief because frequently I bring it up, but I hadn't yet. That's something that people around survivors don't understand sometimes, and even
Yeah.
therapists. It's like you need that time to grieve. And sometimes you
Yeah.
can't do it in the relationship. Sometimes you do some of it then. But sometimes after leaving, you still feel that grief. And I think I say in my book at some point, you can love someone, but still set a limit with them and still
Yep.
not want to be around them, not want to
Right.
be able to be with them.
Right.
Love doesn't just disappear. It takes, it's a process.
It's a process.
But loving yourself
Right.
is very important.
Right.
And for those from a Christian tradition, I like to use this. It's like Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. And a lot of times we forget that part.
Hmm.
We're supposed to care about ourselves and love ourselves too.
That's right.
So, I've always said that when people feel selfish because they're taking care of themselves. That's a
Never.
frequent
No,
thing. Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
Never. Right. And
Yeah.
exactly. So this is where, again, not the selfish that leads to being a coercive, abusive person. That's not the
Mm-hmm.
framework. It's reframing that to know that it's not selfish at all, to take a deep breath, to know what
It's,
nourishes us, what we need in these moments.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's self-interested. That's how
Right.
I reframe it with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Self-interested. We should all be interested, like what's in our best interest. And
Mm-hmm.
that's another way to know that you're in a good relationship is somebody values your interest. If
Mm-hmm.
it's important to you, then it's important to them.
Right.
In terms of
And whether they
supporting you.
want to, exactly, and whether they want to be involved or not. If
Yeah.
somebody's a football fan, that's fantastic. I don't have to be a football fan, but
Yeah.
do you? I respect that you are a football fan. I'm saying if you're,
Mm-hmm.
it can be
Mm-hmm.
anything, dancing or whatever it is. We can
Right.
mutually respect the other's hobby or interest without
Mm-hmm.
doing that whole coercive dance of it or poo-pooing it, right?
Exactly.
Why would you even like
Exactly.
that? There was
Yeah.
somebody that didn't like mint ice cream who said, I don't think anybody, why would anybody want mint ice cream? And I thought, well, isn't that silly? That's that.
You're
I
right.
can like mint ice cream. Can't I? Of course. Anyway.
Someone who says
Yeah.
that is demonstrating that they have a lot of difficulty. You mentioned narcissism, being
Yeah.
able to they see everything through their own lens. They
Yep.
can't see and value other people as well.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
Mm-hmm.
There are many flavors of ice cream or non-ice cream or vegan,
Yes.
whatever it is. There are many flavors of it. Jennifer, this is great. Is there anything else you'd like to know, something from the book or something that you're doing? I know you've got websites and things or other last
Mm-hmm.
little, I usually end with a nice little nugget, some little sprinkle of love and joy that you would like to share with us today.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that anyone who emails me, I will send them 2 free articles, handouts, whatever you want to call them. One is accountability clues. So sometimes people are talking to an abusive partner and wanting to still hoping that the relationship can happen and they're promising to do work on it. And so how to tell, are they actually making that progress? Because sometimes it's very confusing, particularly if you're listening to their point of view about it. And then the second one is self-care as self-regulation. So self-care is so hard. We've just been talking about how, you're told that you're selfish. If you've learned that, if you learned that growing up, or if you have heard it from an abusive partner, it can be really difficult. Plus, the chaos of abuse, being in an abusive relationship, it's like you don't have a lot of energy for it too, even if you can, and so learning that, but how abuse affects you really leads you to be emotionally dysregulated. And that's like a therapeutic term, but it's like it's what is behind people saying, gee, I feel like I've lost myself, or I don't know what I feel, and those kinds of things. And so self-care can be part of that. And I like to encourage people to start small. If it feels impossible, one thing you can do is while you're doing, let's say, the dishes or some activity that you normally do, breathing. just
Mhm.
breathing. Take a few moments right now and just kind of focus on your breath. That's what I would do in a session. That's what you can do right now. And notice how it feels. Now, for some people, they get more anxious. So if that's true, that just means there are other techniques that can be helpful. But doing, a minute by minute, doing something for yourself. Maybe it's going to the grocery store if you do the grocery shopping, and before you go in, it's taking 5 minutes in the car to
Mhm.
yourself, valuable
Mhm.
moments that you can just relax. Maybe you can think through. It's like when you have the time, you're able to kind of reflect more on what's going on than when you're caught up in the day to day chaos of being in an abusive relationship. So those are two things that I'm offering. And all you have to do is email me, and the email will be provided. Um, I You talked about what I'm offering. I'm working on a new training with a colleague, not a therapist, but someone who's been a survivor, and been through it, and she's an actress. And so we're doing some role plays
Mhm.
that really are going to kick up my training to the next level, because I've had people, I've 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 had case studies and so forth, but it'll be wonderful to be right there. So if you have any listeners or therapists who are interested in that kind of training, that is something you can contact me about, and that I will be doing in the future.
Wonderful. Jennifer Parker, this has been very profound and very helpful. And I hope it helps a lot of people out there. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, and take care of yourselves, everyone.
Yes. Thank you so much. And thanks for listening, everybody. Please be sure to like, follow, review, and share this episode and many more. This is Lasting Conversations. We get to the heart of everything.